Check behind the painting, sir. The voice was so small it should have disappeared into the room. It came from Nora, the housekeeper's little daughter. 7 years old, standing in the doorway of Lorenzo Vescari's private office with her school satchel still hanging from one shoulder and rainwater drying on the toes of her shoes. She was not crying. She was not frightened. She was not even trembling. She only lifted one finger to her lips, glanced once toward the hallway to make sure no one had followed her, and pointed at the large painting hanging behind Lorenzo's desk. That was the exact moment the most feared man in Manhattan stopped breathing the way ordinary men breathe. Because children do not cross the threshold of Lorenzo Vescari's office by accident. And children do not whisper like that unless they have seen something adults have missed. At first, he thought it might be tape, a loose wire, some harmless thing only a child would find mysterious. But when he walked around the mahogany desk and lifted the heavy gilded frame off the wall, the first thing he saw was a listening device no larger than a pocket lighter, fitted neatly into the wood backing, black against black, almost invisible. And then he saw the second thing, a brass key, small, old, wrapped in pale blue thread and tucked beneath the lower corner of the frame, hidden so carefully that no one would have noticed it unless the painting had been taken completely off the wall. Lorenzo stared at both objects without moving. The bug meant danger, the key meant a message, and, together, they meant that whatever was happening around him was far worse than simple betrayal. Before we uncover what was hidden behind that painting, take a second to subscribe if you enjoy emotional mafia stories with unexpected twists. Like this video if you believe even the smallest clue can change everything, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Now, let's find out why one little girl's whisper changed Lorenzo Vescari's life forever. Because people plant a bug when they want to hear you. People hide a key when they want you to find the truth. He set the painting down with extraordinary care, as if rough hands might disturb the meaning of what had just been revealed. Then he crossed the room, locked the office door, and came back to the desk. His fingers peeled the listening device from the wood backing. It was professional grade, slim casing, clean build. No amateur had put it there. Lorenzo turned it over in his hand. On the edge of the device, caught beneath the adhesive, was a single strand of pale blue sewing thread, the same color wrapped around the key. The same color Elena Romano had sewn by hand into the hem of the dress she planned to wear to their engagement dinner on Saturday night. And suddenly, the room felt colder than it had a second before. Lorenzo placed the bug on the desk, then he crouched until his eyes were level with Nora's. "Tell me from the beginning," he said quietly. Nora clasped both hands around the strap of her satchel. "I came to bring my mother's scarf," she whispered. "She forgot it in the cleaning closet." "The door to your office was open a little bit. I saw Miss Elena go in. I thought maybe she was looking for you. Then I saw her take the painting down." Lorenzo did not blink. "You are sure it was Elena?" Nora nodded at once. Not the nod of a child guessing, the nod of a child repeating what her eyes knew. "She had the blue thread on her sleeve," the girl said. "The same pretty thread from the dress she was fixing in the kitchen yesterday." Lorenzo lowered his gaze for 1 second to the brass key in his hand. "Did you see anyone else?" Nora hesitated. That hesitation was the part that mattered. Because children lie quickly when they are inventing. They hesitate when they are deciding whether a hard truth is safe to say aloud. "Yes," she whispered at last. "After Miss Elena left, your cousin Carlo came in. He did not take the painting down. He only touched the corner of it like this." She reached out and pressed 2 fingers lightly against the edge of Lorenzo's desk, imitating the gesture, as if he was checking whether it was straight. The blood in Lorenzo's veins turned slow and heavy. Carlo Vescari, his underboss, his blood. The man who had stood beside him at every burial that mattered. The man who had held Lorenzo upright at 29 years old, when his father was shot leaving church, and the whole family turned to the son and waited to see if he would break. Lorenzo rose slowly. "From this moment on," he said, "if you ever see anything strange in this house or in this office, you come only to me, not your mother, not the guards, not anyone with my name, only me, do you understand?" Nora nodded. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, took out a chocolate wrapped in gold paper, and placed it in her hand. "You were brave," he said. She held the candy but did not smile. "Miss Elena was crying," she said softly. Lorenzo looked at her. "In the office?" Nora shook her head. "Not with tears, but with her face." Then she slipped out the door. And what that little girl had just given him was more dangerous than any gun in the city. Because a bug meant treachery, but a crying face with no tears meant fear. Lorenzo stood alone in the office for perhaps 10 seconds, then he turned toward the far wall, lifted a framed black and white photograph of his late father, and pressed his thumb against the hidden switch behind it. A panel slid open, a private monitor lit the dark shelf inside. Only 2 people in the world knew that camera existed: Lorenzo and Salvatore Greco, his consigliere. He pulled up the recording from that afternoon. At 4:12, the office door opened. Elena stepped inside. She wore a cream coat, dark hair pinned back, one hand closing the door behind her. She stood for a moment very still in the middle of the room, not listening like a thief, gathering herself like a woman who was about to do something she hated. Then she crossed to the painting. She lifted it down. From her handbag she took the listening device. Her hands were shaking, not a little. Enough for Lorenzo to see it clearly even through the angle of the hidden camera. She fixed the device to the back of the frame. And then, before hanging the painting back up, she did one more thing. She pressed the brass key into the corner of the frame and wound the pale blue thread around the hook 3 times to keep it from slipping free. Lorenzo leaned closer to the screen. That was not panic. That was intent. She wanted the key hidden there. She wanted it found by the person who would be suspicious enough to remove the painting. She stepped back, took out her phone. Dialed, her lips moved. Lorenzo turned the volume up. The recording gave him only fragments, not enough, just a few broken pieces. "I did what you asked." A pause. "No, not him, please." Another pause, then very clearly. "At least let Nico have his medicine." Lorenzo's hand tightened on the desk so hard the wood creaked beneath his fingers. Nico, Elena's younger brother. 19 years old. Conservatory student. Too gentle for the world he had been born too close to, Lorenzo had met him exactly 4 times. Each time the boy had looked at Lorenzo with that careful politeness of someone who knew he was shaking hands with danger on behalf of family. Elena listened to whatever was being said to her on the call. Her shoulders sagged, she closed her eyes. And for one long second she looked like a person standing at the edge of a cliff, already understanding the fall beneath her. Then she ended the call, rehung the painting, adjusted it so it sat perfectly straight, and walked out of the office with the face of a woman who had just locked herself into a disaster. Lorenzo replayed the footage, then again. He did not watch it for the bug the 3rd time, he watched it for the key. Because that little brass key had turned this from one kind of story into another. If Elena had wanted to betray him, she would have left a bug. If Elena had wanted to warn him, she would have hidden a key. And if both were true at once, then somewhere between those 2 objects was the part of the story that could get everyone killed. He called Salvatore. The old man arrived 8 minutes later through the private stairwell. Gray at the temples, broad-shouldered, tailored dark coat buttoned at the throat. He had the face of a retired soldier and the patience of a priest, who had heard every confession without ever speaking of them again. Lorenzo said nothing when Salvatore entered. He only pointed to the monitor. Salvatore watched the footage from beginning to end. And he did not interrupt. When it was over, he looked at the bug on the desk, then at the brass key, then finally at Lorenzo. "This is not a simple turncoat story," Salvatore said. "No. The device is military quality. Imported, clean casing, clean line, not domestic garbage. Whoever supplied it has money and discipline." Lorenzo slid the brass key across the desk toward him. "And she wanted me to find this." Salvatore turned it over once in his palm. On the base of the key, barely visible, were 2 stamped letters. SM. Lorenzo saw them at the same moment Salvatore did. St. Michael. The chapel on the Vescari estate. Elena and Lorenzo had planned to marry there in 6 weeks. Salvatore's eyes lifted. "You think she set the trap for you," he said. "Or left a door open inside it." Lorenzo looked toward the dark window. Manhattan burned beyond the glass in bands of red and gold. "I think," he said quietly, "that if Elena wanted me dead, I would not be finding a key." That evening he went home. The Vescari estate sat on the north shore of Long Island. Old stone, formal gardens, iron gates. And the kind of silence money buys when it wants to imitate peace. The chapel stood at the far eastern edge of the grounds, beneath a row of cypress trees. Whitewashed walls and a bell tower no taller than the roofline of the main house. Elena was in the dining room when Lorenzo arrived. She rose when he entered. She smiled. It was a beautiful smile. It had made difficult days seem survivable for 3 years. Tonight he saw, beneath that smile, a strain so fine it would have escaped anyone who did not already know to look for it. "You're late," she said softly. "I was beginning to think the city had swallowed you." He kissed her cheek because she would expect that. And because men in Lorenzo's world survived by learning to keep their hands steady while their trust bled out internally. "Meetings," he said. She touched his sleeve. "You've barely eaten this week. There are lies told with the mouth. And then there are lies told by tenderness. The second kind hurts more." Dinner passed in a blur of silverware and candlelight. Elena spoke about flowers for the chapel. About where Nora and her mother Marta ought to sit during the ceremony. About the string quartet, about the possibility of rain in late spring. Lorenzo answered where necessary, across the table. Carlo Vescari drank red wine and smiled at the proper times. Elegant as ever, his silvering hair combed back. His cufflinks catching the candlelight, once. While Elena turned to speak to Marta about linen colors. Carlo's eyes met Lorenzo's across the table. He raised his glass slightly. A cousin's gesture, a brother's gesture. Or the gesture of a man so certain of his own position that he had forgotten what kind of animal Lorenzo became when he was wounded. After dinner, Elena went upstairs to review seating cards. Carlo took a call and stepped out onto the terrace. Salvatore remained by the library fireplace pretending to read a shipping report while Lorenzo crossed the hall and slipped out a side door toward the chapel. The night air was cold. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes. Somewhere beyond the trees, the ocean made its slow black sound against the rocks. Inside street, Michael's chapel, only the sanctuary lamp burned. Lorenzo stood in the aisle a moment, letting his eyes adjust. The brass key felt heavier in his hand than metal should feel. He moved to the back pew, where donations were kept in a narrow wooden box beneath the side table. Stamped faintly into the brass lock plate were the same 2 initials. S. He inserted the key. The lock turned. Inside the box lay 3 things: a burner phone, a silver chain with a small saint medal attached, and a folded note written in Elena's hand. Lorenzo unfolded it. "If you are reading this, then you were careful enough to look past what I was ordered to show you. Nico was taken 12 weeks ago. Do not trust Carlo. He has men I cannot see and eyes in rooms I once thought were safe. He says if I speak to you directly, Nico dies first and my mother follows. He made me place the device in your office because he wants the ledger from the lower safe and the names connected to the Palermo route. He says on Saturday night, during the engagement dinner, you will open the safe yourself to impress a guest you have not yet been told about. He says after that, you will not live to close it again. If you still believe I loved you, save my brother before Saturday. If you do not, burn this note and never let him know you found it." Lorenzo read the words twice. Then he unfolded the note one more time, not because he had missed anything, but because some part of him still needed to suffer through the proof that his own blood had reached into his house and used the woman he loved as a weapon. He picked up the silver medal. On the back was engraved a date. Elena's 21st birthday. The saint medal belonged to Nico. Lorenzo had seen it around the boy's neck once at Christmas. He turned on the burner phone. There were 11 video files. The first opened on a concrete room and a metal chair bolted to the floor. Nico sat in it with his wrists tied, his mouth was bloodied. One eye was swollen nearly shut. He was alive. That was somehow the cruelest part, because death is a closed door. Life inside a room like that means hope gets beaten and then forced to wake up again each morning. In the third video, a man off camera asked Nico to repeat his sister's name until he cried. In the sixth, someone pressed a bottle of pills into frame and then pulled it back when Nico reached for it. In the ninth, Carlo himself stepped into the picture. Dark suit, calm face, a softness in his voice so unnatural it made the scene worse. "Tell your sister," he said to the camera, "that loyalty to the wrong man is still disloyalty." Lorenzo shut off the phone. For a long time he stood alone in the little chapel where he had intended to marry Elena. The note in one hand, the saint medal in the other. While around him the candles burned with complete indifference. There is a violence unique to learning that the enemy has your surname. A rival wounds you from the outside. Blood reaches into your house, learns the shape of your heartbeat. And times the knife to the second. Lorenzo went back to the main house by the east corridor. He did not go first to Carlo. He went to Elena. 2 guards stood outside the blue sitting room off the upstairs gallery. Salvatore had placed her there 20 minutes earlier on Lorenzo's silent order. Before Lorenzo went to the chapel, not imprisoned, not yet, watched. Lorenzo sent the guards away and entered alone. Elena was standing by the window, both hands clenched at her waist. Still in the black dress she had worn to dinner, she turned when the door opened. One look at his face and the last of her strength left her. "You found it," she whispered. Lorenzo held up the brass key, her eyes closed. Then he took the note from his coat pocket and set it on the table between them. Beside it, the silver saint medal, when she saw Nico's chain. The sound that came out of her was small and broken and far older than her years. For a moment neither of them moved, then Lorenzo crossed the room and took both of her shoulders in his hands. "I know," he said. That was all. It was enough. 12 weeks of silence shattered inside her all at once. Elena folded against him, not gracefully. Not like the women in films who cry with beautiful restraint, but with the ugly, breathless collapse of a person who has been holding up a burning roof with bare hands, and has finally been told she can let it fall. He held her while she told him everything. Carlo had taken Nico on a Thursday afternoon outside the conservatory. 2 men, a dark van, no witnesses who mattered. The first video arrived 3 days later at a florist Elena used on Madison Avenue. After that came demands, not money, never money, information. Shipment schedules, names, which judges still answered Vescari calls and which had grown expensive. Which captains would stay loyal in a power shift. Carlo wanted Lorenzo's network intact before he cut Lorenzo out of it. He wanted the kingdom before he allowed the king to understand he was already dead. And the engagement dinner? Lorenzo asked. Elena wiped her face with unsteady fingers. He said a guest from Palermo is coming Saturday. He said you would open the lower safe to show him trust. Carlo wants the ledger inside. He told me once he had it. He would make it look like an arrest or a robbery or a car accident on the road to the city. He hasn't decided which version yet. He was proud of that. He liked saying it. Lorenzo's jaw hardened. Why the key? Her eyes lifted to his red-rimmed clear. Because I knew you would never believe words from my mouth if you saw the bug first. Not at once, not with your life at stake. I needed you to find proof with your own hands. He let that sentence sit between them. Not because it hurt, because it was true. He took one step back. Where is Nico? I don't know. Carlo never showed me enough in the videos. Concrete room, no windows. Once I heard gulls. Once I heard a fairy horn. Once I heard chains dragging, heavy chains. Like on a dock. Salvatore knocked once and entered when Lorenzo called him in. Elena stays with Marta and Nora tonight, Lorenzo said. In the East guest suite. 2 guards outside. Men you would trust with your own grandchildren. No one with the Vescari name near that door except me. Salvatore inclined his head. Elena caught Lorenzo's wrist before he turned away. What are you going to do? He looked down at her hand on him. The hand that had planted a bug under threat. The hand that had hidden a key for him anyway. I'm going to bring your brother home, he said. And after that, I'm going to decide what kind of death fits a man who uses family as leverage. Salvatore worked through the night. By dawn he had 3 likely properties. Carlo's official businesses showed nothing unusual. But shell companies and paid intermediaries told a clearer story. One abandoned marine refrigeration warehouse on Staten Island had new generator bills but no declared staff. A second property in Red Hook had security deliveries but no active permits. The third, an old tug repair shed near the Kilvin Cull, had been visited twice in 10 days by a driver on Carlo's payroll. Lorenzo studied the maps in his private office while the city brightened beyond the windows. At 7:15 there was a soft knock at the half-open door. Nora stood there in her school uniform holding a folded paper. Lorenzo motioned her inside. She came close and held out the page. It was a child's drawing done in colored pencil, a little chapel, a little bell tower. A dark square building near water, 3 birds in the sky. And along one edge, heavy gray lines. Repeated again and again. What is this? Lorenzo asked gently. Nora pointed at the dark building. The place from Miss Elena's phone, she said. He looked up sharply. You saw the phone? Not the phone. I heard it, yesterday when Miss Elena was in the laundry room crying. I was under the ironing table because I dropped a marble. The video was loud for 1 second. I heard bells first, like chapel bells, then birds, then chains. Then a horn. Lorenzo knelt to her height. And this? He asked, tapping the repeated gray lines. She pressed her lips together, thinking, tracks. She said, not train tracks, big metal tracks for lifting things. Like at the fish place where my uncle works, Salvatore, who had been standing near the door, moved closer. An overhead gantry rail, he said quietly. Lorenzo looked at him. The old tug repair shed on Staten Island had one. A rusted ceiling rail once used to hoist engines in from the dockside. Children notice details adults dismiss because adults spend too much time deciding what ought to matter. Children simply look. By noon Lorenzo had his plan. Not an army, 12 men, fast and quiet. Too many soldiers and Carlo's outer watchers would smell movement before the first vehicle crossed the bridge. Too few and Nico died in the crossfire. Salvatore would take 4 by water in a service launch through the channel behind the yard. Lorenzo would lead 6 through the landside after cutting the power. 2 would wait on the access road to stop anyone fleeing toward the outer gate. Elena insisted on coming. No, Lorenzo said the instant she asked. Yes, Elena answered just as fast. There was no fear in her voice now. Only exhaustion sharpened into purpose. If Nico hears gunfire and wakes confused, he may panic. If he sees strangers first, he may fight. If he hears my voice, he will come. You don't know what you'll walk into. She stepped closer. I know exactly what I'll walk into. 12 weeks of not being there. He stared at her a long moment. Then he opened the wall safe in his dressing room and took out a compact Beretta. He taught her in silence. Magazine release, safety, grip. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. Do not fire at movement, fire at intent, she learned with trembling hands and an unblinking face. By 11 that night the house had gone silent. Marta and Nora were moved to a secure apartment in Manhattan, with 2 trusted guards and Salvatore's sister waiting there for them. Elena kissed Nora's forehead before leaving. The little girl took Elena's hand and whispered, "Bring your brother back." Elena almost broke then. But she didn't. At 1:40 in the morning, 3 dark SUVs rolled out of the estate with headlights off until the gates closed behind them. Lorenzo sat in the lead vehicle. Elena sat beside him in dark clothes and soft body armor. The Saint medal back around her neck. She held the Beretta low in both hands and kept her breathing steady the way he had taught her. Salvatore's launch was already moving toward the backside of the yard. Rain tapped the windshield in fine silver lines. On the far side of the Verrazzano, the city thinned into industrial darkness. Cranes, stacks of containers, salt in the air. Sodium lights over black water. The tug shed rose ahead of them at the edge of the channel. Long and windowless, roof half-patched. one floodlight burning over the loading door, and another over the side pier. Lorenzo checked his watch, 2:07. Salvatore's voice crackled once in his earpiece. Water team in position. Lorenzo opened his door. Cold harbor air hit his face. Cut the power, he said. A second later the floodlights died. Darkness swallowed the yard, then they moved. 6 men crossed the gravel fast and low. One clipped the padlock on the side service door. Another caught it before it hit the ground. Lorenzo entered first, inside. The shed smelled of oil, rust, and cold wet metal. The only light came from emergency strips along the floor. Overhead, somewhere deep in the building. Chains shifted with a faint iron complaint. Nico was here. Lorenzo knew it with the certainty of an animal recognizing a trap by scent. 2 guards appeared from an office alcove before they had gone 10 meters. Lorenzo dropped the first with a shot to the shoulder, and his man disarmed him before he hit the ground. The second raised a rifle and Elena fired before Lorenzo could. Her first shot went wide. Her second hit the guard in the thigh and spun him against the wall. One of Lorenzo's men finished the struggle and dragged the rifle clear. Elena stood frozen for half a heartbeat. Lorenzo touched her elbow. "Forward," he said, and she came with him. At the far end of the shed, a metal staircase rose to a caged walkway running beneath the old hoist rail Nora had drawn. Below it were maintenance bays. Chained tool lockers, tarp-covered engines. And beyond them a concrete room built newer than the rest of the structure. That was where the heavy door stood. That was where Nico would be. Gunfire erupted from above. Carlo's men on the catwalk. Lorenzo's team broke left behind the engine housings. Bullets punched sparks from steel and whined into the dark. One of Lorenzo's shooters took the upper angle and fired, back in controlled bursts while Salvatore's water team breached from the rear loading door. Trapping Carlo's men between levels, the building filled with the noise of metal and gun smoke and shouted names. Elena dropped to one knee behind a winch casing. Both hands on the Beretta, breathing hard but steady. Lorenzo moved with the old lethal memory his body had never forgotten, sliding from cover to cover. Firing when he had a line, never wasting a shot. A man rushed the lower corridor toward the concrete room with a shotgun. Lorenzo took him down at 6 paces. Another emerged on the catwalk above. Salvatore put him over the rail with a single round to the chest. Then, through the ringing in the shed, Elena heard it, a cough, thin, broken, human. "Nico," she whispered. The sound came again from inside the concrete room. Lorenzo reached the heavy door. Locked. He shot the padlock twice. It held. One of his men shoved a pry bar into the gap. Another leaned his full weight into it. The metal screamed. The frame bent. Lorenzo drove his shoulder into it once, twice. And on the third hit the lock plate tore loose. The door burst inward. Nico was inside. He was tied to a straight-back chair with his wrists bound in plastic restraints, and one ankle chained to a ring in the floor. He was thinner than in the first video, too thin. Bruises in different stages colored his arms and jaw, but he was alive. "Elena?" he said, and his voice failed halfway through her name. She was at his side in a second, dropping the Beretta. Fumbling at the restraints with fingers that had stopped working properly because fear had finally given way to relief. Lorenzo cut the bindings with his knife and snapped the ankle chain with bolt cutters. One of his men passed forward. Nico tried to stand and almost collapsed. Elena caught him. He buried his face in her shoulder and made no sound at all. Sometimes the people who have suffered longest do not cry when rescue comes. Sometimes they are simply too tired. "Take him out the rear," Lorenzo said. "Straight to Salvatore's boat." Elena looked up at him. She understood from his face that he was not coming with them. "Lorenzo, go," she nodded once. Then a slow clap sounded from the darkness above. Carlo Vescari stepped into view on the catwalk, one hand resting on the rail, the other holding a pistol pointed lazily toward the floor. He looked almost amused. The building had partly emptied around him. His men were down or fleeing toward the outer yard, still he smiled. Because certain men mistake patience for victory even when the ground is falling away under their shoes. "You were always too sentimental where she was concerned," Carlo said. Lorenzo moved 3 steps out from the concrete room, weapon up. Blood should have taught you better, Carlo went on. A woman cries and suddenly you start believing in reasons. Elena shifted Nico behind her. But Lorenzo lifted one hand slightly without looking back. Keep moving. Carlo saw the gesture and smiled wider. She hit a key, he said. I'll give her that clever little thing. But you know what her mistake was? She assumed love makes a man merciful. It doesn't. It makes him careless. Lorenzo's voice was quiet enough to be deadly. Come down. No, I don't think I will, Carlo fired. The round tore into the steel beside Lorenzo's head. Then the catwalk erupted. Lorenzo returned fire and moved left as Salvatore's last 2 men came in from the rear angle. Carlo dropped behind a suspended engine block and disappeared deeper into the upper shadows. Get Nico out! Lorenzo shouted. Elena and 2 guards moved fast toward the rear bay. For one terrible second, it looked as though they would make it cleanly. Then a last gunman, hidden behind a compressor stack, rose from the dark and leveled his weapon at Elena's back. Nico saw him first. Perhaps because people who have been hunted learn the shape of danger faster than everyone else. He tried to shove his sister down, but his body was too weak. Lorenzo turned. He was too far. Salvatore was blocked by the hoist rig. And Elena, hearing Nico's broken warning, half-turned at the exact instant the gunman fired. The bullet hit her high in the side just beneath the vest. She dropped hard against the concrete. For a fraction of a second, the whole shed seemed to stop around that impact. Then Lorenzo's world narrowed to one point. He shot the gunman twice without remembering raising the weapon. The man fell. Carlo ran, not toward the front yard. Toward the upper ladder leading to the old roof hatch and the pier beyond. Lorenzo looked once at Elena on the floor. Salvatore already dropping beside her, pressing a hand to the wound. Nico crawling toward her on shaking knees. Go, Salvatore barked. I have her. Lorenzo went after Carlo. The upper roof hatch slammed open into rain. Wind hit Lorenzo full in the face as he climbed onto the roof, then down the far metal stairs to the dock. Beyond the pilings, the channel rolled black under the storm. Harbor lights trembled in the distance. Carlo was at the end of the pier trying to untie a mooring line with blood on his sleeve from a grazing shot. Lorenzo had not realized he landed during the exchange. He turned, pistol up. They fired at the same time. Carlo's shot went wide into the water. Lorenzo struck him low in the abdomen. Carlo staggered against the piling and dropped the gun. Rain darkened his hair flat against his skull. For the first time that night he looked old. Listen to me, Carlo gasped. It doesn't end with me. There are names in your family, men who wanted change. Men who were tired of the old roots, tired of you acting like your father's ghost was still in the chair. Lorenzo advanced 1 step at a time. Then speak them. Carlo laughed once and winced with the pain of it. And give you everything? You took a boy to get at me. I took leverage. Carlo snapped. Sudden fury breaking through the elegance. Because you would have chosen her over blood eventually. I saw it, everyone saw it. The family was becoming sentimental. Safer for you. Softer for everyone else. That is how men like us disappear. No, Lorenzo said. Men like you disappear because you begin to think love is weakness and cruelty is strategy. Carlo's face changed at that. Not with shame, with understanding. Because at last he could hear from Lorenzo's voice what kind of ending had arrived for him. He made one desperate move toward the dropped pistol. Lorenzo shot him through the chest. Carlo fell backward onto the rain-dark planks and lay still beside the black water he had intended to escape across. When Lorenzo returned inside, the shed no longer sounded like battle. It sounded like aftermath. Elena was on a stretcher near the rear loading door, pale but conscious. One hand locked around Nico's wrists so tightly no one had been able to separate them. Salvatore had bound the wound and slowed the bleeding. But his face told Lorenzo plainly that speed mattered now more than vengeance did. Nico looked up as Lorenzo came near. The boy's lips trembled once. She never gave you up, he said hoarsely. Not once, Lorenzo put his hand against the back of Elena's head. Just for a second, rainwater and blood had dampened her hair at the temple. I know, he said. They took her to the private surgical floor in Manhattan, the Vescari family used for men they could not afford to lose publicly. Salvatore made the calls. Doors opened, elevators cleared. A surgeon in dark blue scrubs met the stretcher before the vehicle had fully stopped. Lorenzo sat outside the operating room, with blood drying on his cuffs and salt water still clinging to the hem of his coat. Nico sat 2 chairs down wrapped in a blanket, face hollow with exhaustion. Saint medal gone from his neck because it hung now beside Elena's on the tray of her personal effects. Marta arrived just before dawn. Nora came with her. Sleepy-eyed, hair unbrushed, clutching a folded sheet of paper. She did not ask what had happened. She looked once at Lorenzo's face and understood enough. She climbed onto the chair beside him and tucked the drawing into his hand. This time it showed the chapel again, but now there were 4 figures in front of it. A tall man, a woman with dark hair, a thin boy standing beside her, and a little girl off to one side holding a yellow bell. At the top she had written, in careful crooked letters, "When everyone comes." Lorenzo closed his hand around the page and looked away because the human body can survive many violent things. But there are moments of tenderness it cannot absorb without shaking. The surgeon came out 3 hours later. The bullet had missed the lung by less than an inch. Elena would live. When Lorenzo heard those words, something inside him that had been clenched since the office painting finally loosened enough for breath to return. He went into her room alone. She lay pale against the pillows, 1 shoulder bandaged and 4 in her arm. Hair brushed back from her face. When she opened her eyes and saw him, she tried to smile. He sat beside her. For a few seconds he said nothing at all. Then he took her hand. I should have seen earlier that fear and betrayal are not the same face, he said quietly. I should have known the difference when it was yours. Elena's fingers tightened around his. You found the key, she whispered. Yes, and Nico? He's safe. Only then did tears slip from the corners of her eyes. Not many, just 2 exhausted tears. The kind that come after pain has finally been given permission to leave. Lorenzo bent and pressed his forehead to her hand. In the hallway beyond, dawn was beginning over Manhattan. 3 months later, the wedding took place in St. Michael's Chapel exactly as it had nearly failed to. Small, private, no Palermo guest, no strategic alliances disguised as blessings. No men invited because they ought to be pleased. Only the people who had stayed true when truth became expensive. Elena wore ivory silk and no veil over the scar at her side. Nico, thinner still but healing, played violin at the front of the chapel. And there was not a dry eye in the first 3 rows before the vows had even begun. Marta sat beside Salvatore's sister. Nora stood near the aisle in a pale blue dress, solemn as a tiny witness before a court that finally meant well. When Lorenzo and Elena spoke their vows, they did not speak like 2 people who had lived a perfect love story. They spoke like 2 people who had seen exactly what the world was willing to do to them, and had chosen each other anyway. That kind of promise sounds different. It sounds less polished. And far more true. After the ceremony, Lorenzo took Elena to his Manhattan office for a moment alone before the reception dinner. The old painting still hung behind the desk, but not by itself. Beside it, in a narrow black frame, was the brass key, and beneath the key, matted carefully behind glass, was Nora's drawing, "When Everyone Comes Home." Elena looked at it and covered her mouth with one hand. Lorenzo stood behind her, one arm light around her waist. And for a long second neither of them spoke, because some objects stop being objects after a certain night. A key becomes a choice, a child's drawing becomes testimony. A wound becomes the place where love proved what words alone never could. If this story leaves something heavy in your chest tonight, maybe that is because it carries a truth most people learn too late. The loudest person in the room is not always the one who understands what is happening. Sometimes the first person to see the whole disaster clearly is the quiet child no one thinks to ask, or the frightened woman everyone is too proud to believe, or the gentle brother who survives long enough to whisper who never gave whom away. And sometimes what looks like betrayal from a distance is only love under pressure so brutal, it no longer has the luxury of looking beautiful. So tell us in the comments, do you think you would have noticed the key or only the bug? And have you ever discovered too late that someone you judged harshly was actually trying to protect the people they loved? Wherever you are watching from tonight, take care of the quiet ones near you. Listen longer than feels necessary. Ask one more question before you decide what someone's silence means. Because every so often, everything changes behind a painting.